Hi everyone, thank you for joining us for another filmmaker Q&A. I hope you've enjoyed the film, YouTube, an Ally of Convenience. If you haven't watched it yet, please do. It's on our website until Sunday. We'd recommend that you watch it first and then come back and watch the Q&A with us here. Okay, and we have the filmmaker with us today, Jill, and she's going to introduce herself now and a little bit more about what she does. Okay. Hi Jill.
Hi everybody. Hi, my name is Jill Fredenburg. I'm a filmmaker and digital content producer from Memphis, Tennessee. Most of my work does revolve around LGBTQ populations and the way that different apps can algorithmically discriminate against certain groups. But I'm also interested in women's empowerment and other forms of both racial and ability discrimination that happens on different apps.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for sharing your film with us. We really enjoyed it, find it really informative, and we've been having many conversations about YouTube recently and its responsibility to the LGBTQ community, so I think it was much needed as well. So thank you for sharing it. I'd love to hear more about what inspired you to make it and why you felt now was the right time to make the film.
Of course. So YouTube has been a huge part of my entire life, but most importantly, it was a huge part of my own gender and sexuality discovery process. And throughout college, I really enjoyed watching a bunch of LGBTQ content creators. I noticed about 2 years ago that a lot of my favorite creators started to complain about something called demonetization, which basically means that YouTube stopped putting advertisements in front of their videos, which meant that they could no longer monetize and could no longer create as much content as was necessary in order to continue to educate the LGBTQ audience that they had. This wasn't happening with videos where people were being actively hateful towards the LGBTQ community. And it was just really frustrating to see the creators that I loved and the people who really empowered me to learn more about my own identity start to not be able to work with the platform that made them who they were and gained them their audience. And so I watched this happen over time. And then I entered a master's program where I was actually able to study algorithmic discrimination and start to really understand how this happens and all of the different paywalls and platforms that you have to go through in order to struggle with something like this. And then a group of LGBT content creators actually filed a lawsuit against YouTube, which wasn't super promoted publicly. I was not able to contact them. When you're in a lawsuit, you can't really talk to people about it. But I was able to find as much about it as possible. And I decided to make a film for my thesis for my master's program. And that turned into YouTube as an Ally of Convenience. Part of it came just from the frustration of seeing YouTube's Pride videos every year that they would put out. So if you were a queer creator that had a certain level of audience, so you were making YouTube a certain amount of money, then your videos would be fine. But if you only had, 50,000 subscribers, YouTube cared much more about an advertiser's willingness to be part of your video than they actually cared about your ability to educate your audience. And I felt like that was gross, and I still feel like that's really gross. So I decided to make the film.
And what was your research process to making this, and how did you find the right people to interview?
So the hardest person to locate was Gabriel. I wanted to find someone that had openly complained about demonetization against their content, but were not part of the lawsuit because, again, can't really talk to somebody when they're in the middle of a lawsuit. But I reached out to Gabriel over Instagram, and they invited me to New York to interview them and just to chat about the way they first built a platform. And now they've had to move on to Instagram and Facebook more so than YouTube because those platforms have yet to put together the same sort of discrimination that YouTube has. So after finding them, I worked on getting people together that I knew personally and also online that benefited from having this educational content. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't just representing the creators, but I was also representing the people who learn from the creators, because YouTube, the whole point is that there are no barriers. You can go and you can watch anybody's content, and in the same way, anyone can post any sort of content that they want, as long as it's not harmful to the audience, which that's the underlying thing of the film, is that people are viewing LGBT content as harmful when it's really not. And so it was a lot of just reaching out to people, mostly on Instagram, because that's how the world works now. So a lot of DMing people and getting into contact, and then setting up meetings. A resource that, if any filmmakers are watching this, a resource that's really great that I believe is international is Peerspace. So if you don't have a location, or if you're filming off-site and you need a place that looks like a house or something, or you need somewhere to film that you can kind of transform on short notice, Peerspace is a really great tool for that.
Okay, thank you very much. And have your thoughts or opinions around YouTube changed? As you mentioned in the beginning, it was a big part of getting to know yourself and your gender and sexuality identity. And I wondered if your idea of YouTube had changed since making the film.
It has. I still think that it's a really awesome platform, in that you don't need to have the right connections to be able to produce something that you can share with hundreds of thousands of people. But what I do see is the way that YouTube has monetized is actually affecting the way some other apps are monetizing. TikTok is a really great example. So right now, there are tons of really great LGBT content creators on TikTok. And TikTok is not yet monetized, but something is happening where a lot of TikTokers that identify as LGBT and use those keywords are actually getting shown to fewer numbers of people. So it's a frustrating thing, but I'm glad that I understand it in the way that YouTube did it, because I'm seeing it reoccurring on these other apps. Somehow places like Instagram are not having this problem yet, and I hope that they can avoid it. But I still view the app as really necessary and important, and I think that the creators there will always want to post there. It's just a matter of if that will remain their primary method of communication with their audiences. I think Ari mentions in the film, you see a lot of LGBT content creators needing to move to Patreon in order to get support. And you don't really see that from a lot of other creators. There are people who make hundreds of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, honestly, off of doing prank videos and putting out really sexist and racist content. And it's just not being treated with the same negativity that LGBT content is. And so I'm still grateful that the platform exists, but I think that they owe it to their LGBT creators to do better.
Yeah, we actually had a panel discussion with some web series creators that mostly use YouTube as their platform, and one of the points we were discussing is content being flagged as being for an adult audience, or being highly sexual, when the content in reality may have been quite a tame love scene or a kiss, but it's between two men or two women. And I don't know. Is there anything you think needs to change? What needs to change to stop that from happening?
This is very much a difficult answer, but it's the one that I think is the most true, is we have to have a huge societal recognition of LGBT couples and honestly, like, people in general as not inherently sexual until something happens that makes them so. Like, until I actually see some genitalia on screen, like two women kissing is not a hypersexual thing. But because of the way that like straight cis men view lesbian women, it gets hypersexualized. Because of the way that most cis straight people view gay men, they're hypersexualized. And so I think until we start to really educate folks on not holding those biases within themselves, it'll be really hard to get the people who are programming these platforms to not put those holds in place. this also needs to change within advertisers in general. Like, there's no reason Coca-Cola should try to avoid putting an ad in front of a lesbian couple going to Disney World. You know, like, there's nothing gross or wrong about that. And it's still getting so many views. Coke would be really, I'm just using Coca-Cola as an example. I've never seen a Coke ad on YouTube. But like, they that would be an opportunity for them. And so we also need to be supporting brands that are actively working to support these content creators. There are a lot of like sex toy ads that are really awesome, and because they're already sexual, they don't really mind getting put in front of LGBT content. The problem with that is pigeonholing. Like, LGBT content creators need to be able to look outside of strictly sexual brands for support, and then the app itself, like YouTube as a platform, should be financially compensating them for getting the number of views that they do.
Yeah, and you're talking, it's about it being a much bigger issue that we need to tackle in society first, and kind of brings me on to my next question that I wanted to ask you about the film being used educationally, and if that's something that you'd considered or wanted to do with the film, is to use it in an educational manner.
I definitely would love to do that. I need to look into more of what it would take in order to get everything thoroughly fact-checked so that I can more confidently go through that. And I also think I would like to see the result of this lawsuit so that I can update the film. And because I think the one body that I really wanted to talk to that I received no response from was YouTube itself. And other than a couple of weird tweets and public statements that were pretty superficial, YouTube hasn't really commented on this. I think after the lawsuit is over, they will have a more substantial view and stance on this issue. And even if it isn't in our favor, I would love to get to actually talk to them and then maybe take the film on tour and really use it as a warning signal to other app developers and people who are creating platforms as something to avoid. Because I think this is a really dark mark in YouTube's history. When it first came out in, I think, 2005, I was going to say 2015, when it first emerged, it was this really beautiful democratic platform where you could kind of teach anybody about anything. And to see the way that this systemic bias against queer people has impacted the platform frustrates me, because I think it would have been fairly simple for YouTube to not do that. You know, all you have to do is not have LGBT keywords flag anything inherently. Now, if it said like LGBT and then the words sex scene, you know, sure, flag that. That's fine. I think most of us know where the line is between adult content and kids content. It's just, I think it's simpler than what YouTube wants us to think. And so I would love to use the film as an educational tool for future projects, because if we can avoid the momentum that this bias seems to have moving forward, I think that would really benefit us as a society as a whole. And it impacts other groups of people as well. And something that I noticed, a lot of cis white male creators who happen to be gay too. So like Tyler Oakley is a really big example. He doesn't complain about demonetization in the same way that a lot of like Black trans creators do. So it's even disproportionately affecting already oppressed groups, even within the oppression against the LGBT community. So I think YouTube needs to change that bias, but then also look deeper and see, you know, why are some creators' videos being seen as acceptable, whereas others aren't.
And would you consider making the documentary a longer project, a feature, or maybe a series?
I would be really interested in both of those things. I can see a series a little bit more clearly, because I would love to take the same research methods and apply them to multiple platforms, and get to speak with more experts on why they think this is happening. Because I'm not going to pretend that the way that I understand YouTube is inherently what is happening with all other apps and platforms. I just think that it is a model that some people are mimicking in a really dangerous way.
Okay. And apart from the obvious YouTube not being available for comment, what other major challenges, if any, did you face making the film?
My timeline was a little tighter than I would have liked it to be. I spent the summer before last summer on this film, and I made an initial version, so a short 6-minute version, in about a month, which was a really great challenge. I, again, highly suggest any filmmakers, if you can give yourself a tight deadline for a short version of a longer project that you would like to do, it's a really great practice. And then when I was expanding it, I only had a semester, so I think it was about 3 months. And the challenge that posed was mostly in actually getting my interviewees, because working with other people's schedules is always difficult. And then there was some travel involved. So I think the benefit of doing something like a series would give me more time to really lay out and delve deep into ideas that you can't really touch in a 20-minute film. So for example, we talk about how some creators have somehow bypassed this system by having enough views that YouTube makes enough money from them that they're able to avoid it. But because the film is only about 20 minutes long, the further discussion about that had to get cut down. Editing is always hard. And I did this entire project. I had a small crew, but I was the writer, producer, editor, and making those decisions is painful. People in the journalism industry always say, kill your darlings. And every time I had to cut one of those integral scenes, it really hurt. And so I think the benefit of making this a longer project or a series would be to really get to understand those ideas. I don't want people to come away from this film with like a lack of hope that things can change, because they can. We just really need to put the pressure on.
Thank you. And are you working on anything at the moment? Any other projects at the moment? Film projects?
I'm not currently working on any film projects specifically. I'm working on a video essay series that I'm hoping will dive deeper into definitely LGBT ideas, but they're not quite as technology related. I recently published my first book. It's called LGBTQ plus Revolution 2.0, and I'm hoping to take this video series as a way to expand on the chapters that are in that book.
Okay, marvelous. We will look out for the book. Are we going to be able to find the book in Europe, or?
It's already on Amazon, and so you're definitely able to purchase at least the ebook. You might have to pay a little bit for shipping in Europe, but it should be in bookstores by the end of the month. That's the goal.
Mm-hmm. And I guess for my last question is, do you feel that there's been any queer characters or creators that have been important to you growing up that you feel you identified with?
Ash Hardell on YouTube is an incredible content creator. They are one of the people that originally complained about getting demonetized. And they were such a great example, and are still such a great example, of how you can be in the LGBTQ community and still need to work towards being a better ally to other letters in that acronym. So Ash is I believe they are non-binary, and gender non-binary. I always and I didn't know what that was before I found them. And the way that they educated me on supporting my friends who are also gender non-binary made a huge impact on my friendships in undergrad and after. And I just think more creators, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement happening right now, more creators need to own up to the areas where they are lacking, and be an example of how to educate themselves and move forward. And any sort of learning that you can do vocally really positively impacts other people, as long as you don't center yourself in that language.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us today and getting up early and doing this with us. I know there's a big time difference. Thank you for sharing the film with us. I really do hope we get to see it in a longer form as well, so fingers crossed. To anyone who's just watched this, again, thank you for joining us. If you haven't seen the film yet, please do go and watch it on our website. It will be available until midnight on Sunday, UK time, so make sure you do watch it. And thank you very much. Bye.